testing. Okay. I think the battery should still be good. I'll just hope it records. Yeah. Let me just do a test. Okay, testing. Getting a little reading on there. Okay. Okay. Yeah. YouTubers might have to turn their volume all the way up. Okay, that's alright. That's okay. Okay. Well, lots going on, isn't there? Can't even walk around here. Okay. I'm alright. I won't walk all the way over there. Okay. Here's the assignment sheet. Thanks. And so I shall return some of these, what do you call them? Papers. Yeah, just keep them coming, everybody. I want to help you with your writing. And this week is the week of massive writing, isn't it? Yep, okay, and I have some exams still I have to return. Okay. I posted this flyer on the Moodle YouTube thing, and so you can download those, and the class should be posted on CyberBear today, my film class. That's what I'm talking about. Here's another one, and just this syllabus I'm revising because I have to rethink how many films I could show in a regular fall semester compared to the summer when I showed it before in a 5-week summer class. They say they're supposed to be the same amount of time, but it doesn't work out that way, really. So I'm going to have to refigure it. I'll be showing serials of these movies, like in excerpts, 2 or 3 days to show a movie. Today, I think they sent me an email saying that this is as long of a title as we could put in there, and they're working on it, so it should be, yeah. Film class should be fun. Yeah, there's your, looks good. Sam. So if you have any questions about the notes I wrote, let me know. Oh, you're dropping a lot of stuff. You got that? Okay. Bev, I sent you an email. I brought a paper copy of that speech because I accidentally kept printing them because nothing was coming out of my printer. And then I realized, oh yeah, I'm connected to the printer in the basement. In the office. So I had 4 copies before I figured that out. Here, here's that one, and there's more, Folks, I discovered last night for your researching pleasure, the African American newspapers of the 19th century database on Mansfield has added about 5 new data sources of on women's rights movement activists, and one of the earliest women's equality newspapers called The Lily. It was published first by Amelia Bloomer, also known as the woman who invented bloomers, the first women's pants, when she tried to say, hey, why can't women wear pants? We gotta wear these freaking dresses all the time, you know? Anyway, so there's a lot there now for your research. I have a few people I know of, at least, that are doing research on the women's movement. So that's up there. If anybody needs any help with how to access and utilize the databases, how to do a search, you know, come by my office. I'd be glad to. I already showed a couple of people this, you know, just come by the office and let me show you around the neighborhood, the research and neighborhood. There's a lot out there and some keys to successfully using it. Another source for speeches is the Liberator newspaper on the 19th century newspaper database. I should be passing out papers while I talk. Okay, there you go. And she's not here. Neither her. Sarah, here's another one. Oh! What? Is this a rough draft of an essay on? Was I supposed to give comments to this? Looks like I didn't write anything. Okay, so I have that. I'll keep this then. Look at it. Oh, here's the final one. Okay, I've got them all bunched together here. Okay, sorry everybody. Um, I guess if I just had people come to my office to get their papers, then I wouldn't take time to do this. But why not, you know? I'm not a hard-ass, mean guy. I just like to help. Okay, all these people are not here. They're never here. Why do I keep looking at their papers? All right, that's it, everybody. And if you sent me or ever do send me a paper by email and you don't hear back from me, like right away acknowledging, hey, thanks for sending your paper, I'll get right on this, send it again. Those emails get lost. They get lost in the pile up, especially this time of the semester, and I forget them, you know, and don't print them right away. I forget about them. So if you don't hear from me like within half a day after you, 5 or 6 hours after you send it to me, send me another one. I'll be glad. I wish I had a little nurse that followed me around, helping me with my memory all day long. You know, says, okay, don't forget this. You know, I don't know, maybe I'll have one someday. Who knows? Okay, that's the items. Okay, we can get back to lecture now. Um, so I'll read this speech on Wednesday. Got this one today. All right. So this is major, you know. This is like a turning point in the abolitionist movement. The Free Soil Party, 1848, following on the heels of the Mexican War, which turned out more than anything else to be a pro-slavery war, because you had slavery expand right away into that biggest state acquired, which was Texas. Oh, hi, Deanna. Remind me to give you your paperback at the end of this. And during that war and after, this free soil concept really takes hold. It had been rooted in the Liberty Party, and you have this Pennsylvania congressman I'm going to read from your Holy Warriors book, really expressed the sentiment real well. I'll read it and then I'll interpret it. That's what I'll do. Yeah, instead of leading into it. David Wilmot, where are you? Okay, There you are. Okay. 1846. And this does not sound like you'd imagine an abolitionist to talk from all that we've learned up to now. But listen to what he says. I would preserve for free white labor a fair country, a rich inheritance, where the sons of toil of my own race and color can live without the disgrace which association with Negro slavery brings upon free labor. Okay. Sounds like he's talking about something we'd call a taint. Like something's been harmed and the honor of it has been removed. So just backtracking a second here. He's introducing a proviso, which is we also call nowadays a rider into legislation, where you have some legislation about something completely different. In many cases, this was more relevant to the passing of the War Act in 1846, where somebody puts their issue into a piece of law to get it to ride through on the coattails of the other law. And this little rider that he inserted into the declaration, the Congressional Declaration of War against Mexico, or he attempted to insert this in, it did not pass, was, as you can see up there, to keep slavery from spreading to the new states. In other words, he wanted those new states acquired in the war to be free states, not slave states, and no slavery spread. He was a free soiler. In other words, he wanted the soil itself, the land, to be free from the use of captive human beings for slavery. And when you listen to the language he's using here, sure doesn't sound like his motivation was any love for black people. Not at all. What the Free Soil movement did was mobilized a whole bunch of people for anti-slavery, many of whom were actually racist against black folks. Many of them had no problem with slavery continuing in the South. They did not want to see it expand. That was the heart of the Free Soil movement. So within the whole Free Soil movement, you've got old Liberty Party people who are totally committed to abolishing slavery everywhere. You've got even Garrisonian people. You've got all kinds of hardcore, uncompromising, immediate abolitionists, all the way from that end of the spectrum to the people I was just talking about. You want to know the far other extent of the spectrum? Is something called a Free Soil Democrat. Okay, they're not ready to jump down to the Free Soil Party. They're loyal to the Democrats. And you had some slave owners who called themselves Free Soil Democrats. They wanted slavery to continue right where they were. But one of the reasons a person like that wouldn't want to see it expand into the other states was to keep their competitive advantage. If you had more and more slave owners all the way across the country, that's more competition. If you got these small family farmers, the little house on the prairie type guys. Hey, when I use that as a reference, am I being archaic? Does anybody here not know what I mean when I say Little House on the Prairie? It was a book a lot of you read in school, not just a TV show, right? Okay. Did you ever? Oh, you didn't read the book. Okay. Well, that image, the Little House on the Prairie family farmer image, was the majority occupation of most Americans. And the, the big time plantation owners didn't have any problem with those folks. No competition there. They'll get their little scraping by agricultural income, and that'd be fine. What the big plantation owners didn't want to see was too many people in their market, the mega cotton producing farms. It would drive down the prices for one thing. It would just do all the things that excessive competition causes people to be afraid of. So that's the spectrum there. And then you have all kinds of people in the middle, including the majority of these kind of folks who actually joined the Free Soil Party, who were abolitionists in most cases, but some a little lukewarm or not as fired up as others. So are you following here so far? Yes.
So
Gil.
the motivation of the Free Soil Party as a whole, given the fact they're a large spectrum, it's kind of like
Yeah.
more organized along economic motivation rather
Yes.
than moral motivation.
Yes. But it includes some of the old moral reformers who figured now's the time to get on board politically and use this as a tool for their goal, immediate abolition. So this flexibility in the movement now, where a person could come on board, join the anti-slavery movement. You don't have to love black people to join the anti-slavery movement. Nobody, again, I don't like to use these definitely derogatory terms, but this is the language of the time that went all the way through the Jim Crow era. Nobody can call you a nigger lover, as they used to say to people they felt were what is also called race traitors to whiteness. There's one modern day anti-racist movement guy out of Harvard, and a very radical guy out of the 1970s, who said we should all be race traitors. You know, all white folks. He was saying, treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity. And why am I forgetting this guy's name? But anyway, Ian. Okay, anyway. But so the opposite of that was racial loyalty matters to people who are trying to not only create, but uphold a system already in place based on white supremacy and the justification for exploitation of people's bodies, African American laborers' bodies, you know. And so this sentiment, it also says something else. I don't know if you got this out of what I just read to you, and maybe you read it in your book already. The sons of toil of my own race and color can live without the disgrace which association with Negro slavery brings upon free labor. There's another derogatory term that was used in American history coming out of this, that all what we today call grunt labor, or you're a grunt laborer, you're a working class, hard-working person, they would, in many cases, not everywhere, but in the South especially, say that's niggers' work. Any of the dirty work in the country was dealt that way. And so imagine the plight then of the non-slave owning, poor, white Southern family farmer that in many cases was economically and physically worse off than some of the slaves who at least had meals every day. And these folks were hunting squirrels, trying to stay alive in the Missouri Ozarks and places like that. One of the films I'm going to show, by the way, shows how race consciousness created whiteness too. It didn't just create blackness or colored categories, as they would say, but it stuck a lot of white folks with this idea of whiteness as kind of the answer to everything as far as status, whereas these folks, whiteness didn't do anything for them. There's a film called Winter's Bone, more commonly understood as where Jennifer Lawrence really launched her career. I think she has not that much to do with the essence of this film. She did a good job, and then she went on to be a typical starlet, vacating all the good that she had done in this film. But anyway, but there are some characters in this film that are pretty intense, showing the depth of desperation in, and I don't like to use this other derogatory term, but it's all a part of American history. People living in impoverished conditions who have white status, and their other racial compatriots refer to them as white trash or discarded people that they didn't want to associate with. There's a lot of history behind that, and so the people in the hill countries, the Ozarks, as in this film, who are now living in trailers and hooked on meth. Same in the Appalachians, the coal miners. Big meth problem there. Almost identical to a lot of reservations. Not everyone, but oppression, poverty, hopelessness puts people into that, and there's no limit based on color. Anybody can be subjected to these kind of circumstances. And so, the question, one of many, many questions that we raise and when we watch these films is, how's that whiteness working out for you? What does whiteness do for some of the most oppressed people in the country? And this is what got Martin Luther King Jr. in trouble. When he started talking about, poor white folks, you have more cause to align with us than you do with these wealthy people that are using you in the upper reaches of Southern society. And he started talking about unity based on class and poverty issues, and he got himself killed soon after. Same thing with Robert Kennedy, who was killed about a month later. He had moved beyond just race. And Robert Kennedy was one of the biggest behind-the-scenes proponents of the Civil Rights Act, more so than his brother John. I'm not teaching this subject in this class, but it's something to learn about someday. And he gets killed. And they try to make it look like, in both cases, some random lunatic killed these guys. No, folks, we're not that naive. And I'm not going to go into all the conspiracy theories of the 60s, okay? Folks, see me later about all of it. So this guy, David Wilmo, his own one claim to fame is he's expressing this kind of desperate urge and drive to hold on to whiteness and labor as some kind of honorable ideal. As Thomas Jefferson often expressed in words but not deeds, he admired the yeoman farmer, he called them, the dirt farmer who didn't own any slaves, and just him and his family worked in the land together. And he says, that's an honorable thing. Too bad I can't do it. I gotta purchase kidnapped human beings to work my land. But you guys up there in the hill country that we just pushed you out of the Virginia lowlands up into these Appalachian hill countries and doing that honorable thing there. Good for you. And David Wilmo and a whole heck of a lot of other American small family farmers and all of that they were aware of the plight of the Southerners. Word gets around. And the abolitionists, certainly the free soil abolitionists, made it clear to them. If you allow slavery to spread to the western states, you'll be just as bad off as the yeoman farmers in the Virginia hills and elsewhere throughout the South. Nobody wanted that. You get that? And they felt it not only damaged them economically, but as Wilma was saying, it dishonors them and demeans their supposedly superior racial status. They understood that those people in the Missouri Ozarks and other places had no real status, no benefit to their whiteness. Yes?
I read recently that some of the most radical proponents of slavery wanted to more or less enslave the poor white farmers in the South.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
Oh, no, there is no limit. And that's another thing kind of behind the scenes that comes out more after the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. When you see actual white folks captured under the Fugitive Slave Act, under the claim that they're just white-looking black folks that escaped from Georgia or the Carolinas and were taken back, because there's money to be made off of capturing fugitives and alleged fugitives anywhere you could. You know, it wasn't just Solomon Northup and folks of color. There was in the abolitionist newspapers, you can read about this, an Irish American woman and her kids accused of being light-skinned black folks captured in New Jersey, sent down into the Carolinas somewhere before she finally got somebody to defend her and was able to escape. But how many didn't escape, you know? Because if you look like Harriet Martineau and de Tocqueville and Edward Abbey, all the journalists that went through the South in the early 1800s said on every plantation they went to, they saw slaves that looked like white folks, especially in the houses. So anyway, you know, the abolitionist movement makes the American public aware of the extent of damage of slavery beyond just the slaves themselves. Talking about the plight of the slaves was the most obvious thing, and they really focused on, especially in the 1830s and early 40s. But when you get to the Free Soil Movement and to the Fugitive Slave Act rebellion or the response to that, you get to people saying, this is everybody's problem, the continuance of slavery. And it was a slow learning experience, but as you can see, David Wilmo expressed it there in 46. After 48, you get a lot more people looking at that. And we will go there soon. Okay, I'm going to go to our next topic. What else is on this slide? Anything? Yes, that term. I think I introduced that in the last slide with Charles Sumner, the slave power aristocracy. And the majority of Euro-Americans didn't want to see anybody interfere with the ability of white males to make a profit or to move up in society and have economic success. And that is your motivating force that begins to bring in all kinds of Americans to an anti-slavery position. Okay. Oh, and there's another line. And I already said it. Okay. So, any questions on that? Sorry for the hiccups. I just kind of hit me there. Any questions, comments before we go to our next topic? the women's movement. Oh, I just hit the button. Didn't mean to. There it is. How you doing? You're all just writing like crazy, aren't you? Well, that's good. I'm glad you're taking notes or communicating with somebody somewhere. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here we go. I'm so behind the syllabus. I should have been here a long time ago, but we're getting it all. We'll get there. So, first thing I'll say is it's highly possible or even likely that women outnumbered men among all anti-slavery activists. And here's some figures. There definitely were more female abolition societies throughout the U.S. than the big ones that were dominated by men for the most part. Men didn't have to have their own separate anti-slavery societies because they were in charge of most of the big ones. And so Maria Stewart's African-American Female Intelligence Society, I remind people of, may have been your first women's anti-slavery society. You had a whole bunch more start up a couple years later in the movement to create many of these societies. And so 112 between the beginning of that movement and the end of the Civil War. 6,380 members in the northern women's anti-slavery societies. We don't know how many in the South. Why? They were covert and secret. I mean, they didn't like come out and advertise. A lot of them were just women meeting in each other's homes or plantations, in the case of the Grimke sisters class of women, and just knitting or doing the things that they normally do, and talking about questioning slavery and anti-slavery, reading Angelina Grimke's appeal together. You had that even going on. But most of the female abolitionists in the South were most likely were the middle class, non-slave owning women. The reform of the wealthy is much less likely in most cases. It always has been. But you did have some that turned, just like you had men that turned and sold their, or gave away their slaves, or freedom, and became abolitionists. So there you go. And here's some of the other reasons for separate, local, small women's organizations. The old women's sphere concept, the patriarchal concept of the woman's place. And what did they say? In the home, with the kids, in the kitchen, serving, cooking, cleaning, or if you had servants or slaves, you would be the one that ordered the kitchen servants what to do. But not much beyond that. I can't remember if I said this already, but it's worth saying again. In just about every state in the Union in the 19th century, they had property laws, marital property laws, that when a man married a woman, he automatically acquired all of her property that she owned coming into a marriage. For some of the wealthy plantation people, that included the slaves that the woman was given as an inheritance from her father, you know. And it was almost like the old dowry system back in medieval Europe and before, where a woman comes into the marriage paying basically this guy and his family to accept her into his so-called protection. Now, all of this archaic patriarchal concept was a part of the property laws in each state, including the North and the West later on. Those laws weren't done away with in the first states in the West in the 1880s and that era. In much of the rest of the country, not until the 20th century did they do away with these marital property laws. They had, in many cases, ignored the laws, just like they ignored the laws against bathing from the colonial era. Why did I have to bring that up again? Okay, but anyway, but they're still on the books. I mean, somebody could say, hey, according to this law, her property was mine when she came into this marriage. So under that condition, women were very limited in their prospects for power, leadership, authority in American society, the ability to call the shots, no vote, no right to vote, and all of that. And so under those conditions, women were also not much at liberty to travel around the country as much as the men were by any means. And here's that up here. I'll just put all the bullets up on the screen here. And these are the main ones. Some of you might be able to think of other limitations on women entering into organizational leadership positions, traveling around the country as speakers. The fact that many women actually did enter into leadership positions in the abolitionist movement and become nation level or national speakers touring the country was a sign of great fortitude and perseverance against some very severe obstacles. It is almost miraculous in some cases. There are so many barriers put on them to do this. So under those conditions then, they decided to work locally within their neighborhoods, their communities, their towns, and preach to each other first and to carry the message of anti-slavery to neighboring communities, help women in neighboring towns start their own organizations. I mean, there's a lot of energy being put into this by the women abolitionists and a lot of local level outreach. And by doing so, they also sought to empower women further and beyond anti-slavery for other equality issues, and the vote being the biggest one. So let's look at a list here of some of the activities of the women abolitionists and compare that to what the men were more likely to do. So I'll just put this, all these bullet points up there. Then we'll look at some of the leading names I have on the list there. So communication, if you wanted to sum a lot of this up, kind of being in charge of an underground media. If they'd had computers back then and social media, they would have been all over this, because that's what they were doing at the pre-technological face-to-face level. They were talking to their neighbors, they were carrying around pamphlets and newspapers, promoting the abolitionist newspapers, especially the North Star. When Frederick Douglass started his first newspaper, 1847, one of the first issues that he took up was women's rights. he was a big promoter the following year of the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, the first one. Before it occurred, he was advertising, trying to get people to go to it, trying to get men to listen to women speak. And so, in kind of exchange with Frederick Douglass, a lot of abolitionist women promoted his paper too, and from town to town. Also, the Liberator, as that had a long tradition of women's rights activism too. So that's one of the things they would do: get literature into the hands of women. They also taught literacy. I don't think I put that up there, did I? But women uh, had not had an opportunity for as much education as men in those days. And you still had a good number of working class men and women who had dropped out of school to help support their brothers and sisters in these big households and weren't very literate. And so they also reached out, just like the uplift movement did in the black community, reaching out to people, helping them with their literacy and further education for those who had been forbidden to go beyond grammar school, as Lydia Child had been in that situation too. So there's a couple of things. Petitions, that's one of the biggest things. That's one of the issues that led to the gag rule. The amount of anti-slavery petitions that mostly women had generated and gone from house to house in their towns and collected signatures. Then they would give them to their congressional representative, who would take them to Washington, D.C., and demand an end to the slave trade or an end to slavery. One of the big issues on a lot of these petitions of the 1830s and early 40s was at least end slavery in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. It's an embarrassment to the world. And when by that they meant the European world. That's the only one they really cared about as far as respect and image and all that. And so these petitions made their way to Congress, and was one of the reasons they just got tired of getting these all the time and said, okay, enough of this. Nobody can introduce a petition or a law against slavery in the Congress of the United States. And that went on for almost 8 years, the gag rule. So women were making a big impression and very consequential, all of these actions early on in the 1830s. Here's another one I don't think I mentioned too much: anti-slavery fairs. And these are a lot like your modern day craft markets and the produce markets, the farmers market and places like that. This is an old idea. It goes way back to this period. And started by abolitionists in most cases. The old outdoor market, so there's an ancient idea. That goes way back to many parts of the world. But to do it as a means of communication and not just as a means of mercantilism or market economy, selling your stuff, but to have it as a public fair and a place for people to stand up on soapboxes and express political concepts. The abolitionists were some of the first to do this, and it was women abolitionists who organized a lot of these markets and anti-slavery fairs. And so their focus in all of this is getting word out to the people at the grassroots. Here's another way of putting it, difference between women abolitionists and the men, especially the men in leadership roles and all that. The women abolitionists seem more focused on grassroots people, whereas the men, especially by the 1840s, are more focused on the political and the leader the upper class, the so-called movers and shakers in society, and their outreach is more in that arena. But you had women that were ready to lecture and correct and talk to men of all statuses in society, and Lucretia Mott is one of the best known for that. She didn't feel second class to anybody. This Quaker radical. She's coming up on another slide here pretty soon. But you had women like that would talk to anybody, but you had this larger number that were um, energized at just reaching out to everybody in the community, at the grassroots, people just like them. Other women who had been relegated to the social sphere realm of housewife, mother, and servant to men, all of that. And so if you talk to people that can relate to you and that you can relate to, you get a lot further too than trying to lecture to the big shots and the big wigs in politics. So lots of people on the list here. Can't do biographies on all of them. I'll try to say a little bit here in the time we have left in some larger biographies and quotes Wednesday when we come back. Mariah Stewart, we've already covered, Lydia and the Grimkeys, so they're kind of at the forefront of the movement. Lucretia Mott also at the forefront, as you'll see in the next slide. She began lecturing to audiences of men and women mixed the same year that Mariah Stewart quit and said, I'm done. I'm going to go be a teacher. 1833. 1833, a very momentous year in abolition, the year the American Anti-Slavery Society is formed. And that same year, Lucretia Mott formed the Pennsylvania Female Anti-Slavery Society. And we'll look at that one. And she began speaking in the AASS to mixed audiences of men and women. Abby Kelly, we already looked at a bit. I'll probably say more about her as we move on. Okay, Maria Weston Chapman, and I do have images of some of these women. And I should, as we go through, say who is a woman of color and who's white identified as we move through this. So Maria Weston Chapman and her sister Deborah were white identified upper class women in Massachusetts, very active in the Underground Railroad early on. I have a letter from Maria Weston Chapman to the Massachusetts Female Abolition Society, raising money to pay James Easton Jr., who had become a doctor, for tending to runaway slaves that were injured. So that was a pretty cool thing. I just stumbled on it in an archive. And but that's the kind of thing they would do. They would raise money for all the different causes. It's fundraising up there. I guess I could add yeah, there it is, fundraising. There, yeah, so that's part of the movement of the anti-slavery fairs. The profits were to go to the efforts of activists of all kinds, whether it was anti-slavery activists or women's rights activists, voting rights activists, all of that. I already talked about the free produce movement earlier when I was talking about Lydia Childs and her husband's involvement in that. Well, I guess I know what time it is now. It is past time. I will continue to help with writing. Anybody who has any questions or needs help with research and writing, come on by the office or email me anytime. Okay. Yeah.
Two actually, the first one was sent.
Yeah, I got your exam. That's right.